A dessert appeared from nowhere, and with it, a life vanished. Welcome to Wolfe Mysteries. I'm your host. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're joining me from. It always lights up my day. Let's dive in. Thursday mornings at the brownstone are as predictable as a metronome. Wolfe's upstairs in the plant rooms, holding court with his orchids like they're plotting world peace. Fritz is in the kitchen, orchestrating lunch with the precision of a Swiss watch. And me? I'm in the office, dodging calls from people who think they can sweet-talk Wolfe into solving their half-baked problems. It's the kind of routine that keeps the world spinning until it tilts. At 10:15 that morning, Fritz poked his head in, his face betraying the kind of unease you'd expect if the stove had declared mutiny. "There is a woman," he said, like he was announcing a diplomatic crisis. I set my coffee down. Happens often. What's special about this one? She brought a pudding. I blinked. A pudding? Fritz gave a Gallic shrug, his Swiss calm tinged with French alarm. In a white porcelain bowl. She insists it's for Mr. Wolfe. She won't say who sent her. That snapped my attention like a cracked whip. Wolfe's sacred Trinity orchids, dignity, and the sanctity of 35th Street doesn't include mystery desserts. We're not a bakery drop-off. She got a name? She said, "Tell Mr. Wolfe the past is missing, but the future is sweet." Then she smiled like she'd just spiked the neighbor's tea. "All right," I said, standing. "Let's see what kind of poetic pastry we're dealing with." Fritz stepped aside, and I headed to the front room. There she was, mid-30s, expensive shoes, no handbag, poised like she'd rehearsed for a portrait. She cradled a wide, shallow white bowl like it was an offering to a deity. "I'm Archie Goodwin," I said, keeping it light. "You got a name to go with that pudding?" "I don't," she replied, voice smooth as glass. "That's the point. Pretending caused this mess. That kind of line might work in a stage play, but it doesn't get you past Wolfe's doorstep." I scanned her. Light tan trench, one button missing near the cuff, a whiff of fancy perfume orange blossom with a dark edge. She held my gaze, unblinking. "Who sent you?" I tried. I wasn't sent. I came. The pudding, though, that's what someone wanted Mr. Wolfe to see. I could have fired off more questions, but her stance said answers weren't coming without Wolfe. Against my instincts, I led her down the hall and knocked. Wolfe's voice, rich and irritated, rumbled through. "Yes, a woman with dessert," I said, pudding in a bowl. "And a message something about the past being missing." A long pause. "Bring her." He must have been bored with the orchids. I waved her in, wondering what kind of trouble came with that bulldog. She walked like someone trained to glide without creasing fabric and placed Thebble directly on Wolfe's desk without waiting for permission. If she noticed the big man in his chair, 300 pounds of frowning yellow pajamas, she didn't show it. This, she said, was left on my doorstep this morning with a note that said only, "Mr. Wolfe will understand. I don't understand, but I was told." "You might." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "You are not the first to bring me something that presumed my interest. But this is different." "Possibly sit." She sat. I took my chair. Fritz had stayed just long enough to shut the door behind us. Wolfe leaned forward and studied the pudding like it might confess. It was custard by the look of it. Creamy pale yellow, topped with shaved dark chocolate and a drizzle of some amber syrup. "Have you tasted it, Wolfist?" She shook her head. "I don't eat anonymous desserts. A wise policy," I said. "Mind. If I take a look." I circled to his side, bent down, and gave the pudding a sniff. It was citrusy with a faint nuttiness and something I couldn't quite place. Almond, maybe, but not marzipan. Then I saw it embedded near the bottom, just visible through the side of the glass atony white card. "Hold it," I said. "There's something inside." I fetched a spoon from Fritz, carefully dug through the custard, and pulled out the card. Now writing just a symbol. A black triangle overlaid with a circle. And a vertical line through the center. Wolfe stared at it. Then his nostrils flared. He hated puzzles with symbols. Too much guesswork, not enough logic. But he didn't speak. "He'll ask again." He said finally, "Your name." She hesitated, then said, "Elena Vance." It didn't ring any bells for me. Wolfe looked at her for a long moment. "This arrived on your doorstep?" "Yes." "Where do you live?" "On 82nd Street, near Columbus." "I was leaving for work." It was on the steps, wrapped in linen. "What do you do, Miss Vance?" "I'm a gallery registrar for a private collection in Chelsea." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "You are certain this was intended for me?" She tilted her head. "No, that's why I brought it. I don't know who it's for. I don't even know who I am, really." That earned her a glance from both of us. She gave a tired, brittle smile. "I woke up this morning with no memory of yesterday, or the week before, or anything before that. I know my name because of my driver's license. I know my apartment because the key fit. I know I work at a gallery because there were emails on my phone. But everything else trailed off." Now Wolfe was interested. He shifted his weight, which for him was the equivalent of a full-body gasp. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "See what can be learned about Miss Eleanor Vance. Begin at the gallery, then visit her building. Find out who sent this pudding, and why, and who she was yesterday. Paused before she ceased to exist. Fritz wasn't thrilled about having a mystery woman, and a pudding of uncertain provenance sitting in the front room like a question mark in lipstick. I could see it in the angle of his eyebrows as I passed through the kitchen on my way out. He didn't say a word, just gave me a look that translated to, "This is not what the morning menu called for." I didn't blame him. Elena Vance, or the woman currently using that name, had settled into the red armchair like she belonged there. She hadn't touched the coffee Fritz brought her, and she kept glancing at the covered bowl of pudding on Wolfe's desk like it might suddenly get up and recite her backstory. Wolfe, having asked necessary questions, had retreated to the orchids. That left me to dig into the gallery situation and see who in the art world liked to gift cryptic desserts and arrays. Memories. The Chelsea gallery in question was an elegant old warehouse with high windows and an art director who wore his scarf like a loose noose. His name was Glenn Riker, and he didn't know yet that he didn't like me. "I'm sorry, but Elena's not in today," he said, offering a tight smile that suggested rehearsed patience. "She called in sick this morning." "That's right," I said. "I'm her doctor." He blinked. "You don't look like I'm the other kind, not the prescription pad type, the kind who asks questions." "I don't. She's lost her memory. We're trying to get it back." I figured he'd start with the people who knew her best. They took the starch out of him. He swallowed and motioned me into his office. It was an aesthetic nightmare of brushed metal and splashes of red paint that I hoped weren't supposed to be symbolic. He shut the door and lowered his voice. "She's lost her memory, as in the stuff that makes her. Elena woke up today and had no idea who she was before this week. Lucky for her, her phone and ID were still speaking to her." He sat down, leaned back, and frowned. "That's disturbing. She's been fine as far as I could tell." "Tell me what you can." "She's been working here 2 years. Dependable, precise, almost to a fault. Never late, rarely sick. She catalogs new acquisitions, handles shipping, manages provenance paperwork. Smart woman. But in the last few weeks," he trailed off, hesitating. "Yeah." He shifted uncomfortably. "She's been distracted. Last Tuesday, she forgot a meeting with a collector day before yesterday. She spent 20 minutes testering at a photograph, like she didn't know where she was. What photograph?" Heg it up and walked over to a side cabinet. From it, he pulled a small matte print in a black frame. It showed a group of 5 people, 3 men, 2 women, standing in front of a stone building with ivy on the walls. All 5 were smiling, but it wasn't a yearbook sort of smile. It was the kind of smile you wear when you know the camera's lying. She brought this in about 3 weeks ago, he said that she found it in a shipment of estate materials. Didn't recognize any of them, but something about it. I don't know, it spooked her. I studied the photo. One of the men, tall and narrow, was wearing a pinstripe suit. There was something off about his smile. It didn't match his eyes. Did she say where the shipment came from? She said it wasn't logged. No paperwork, just the photo in a padded envelope, addressed to her care of the gallery. Yao kept the envelope. No, but she did said it might be important. Anyone ask about. Italian seemed unusually interested. There was a man here 2 days ago. Asked for Elena by name. Pinstripe suit, gray tie, slick hair, very high or polite. But there was something about him, like he could tell you what time you were going to die. And not be wrong. That's the skin pinstripe I've heard about today. Did he leave a name? No. She wouldn't see him, told me to send him away. I handed the photo back. Let me know if he shows again. And if you think of anything else, said especially. About the pudding. The what? Never mind, art world's weird now already. From the gallery, I headed up to 82nd Street, where Miss Van secretly resided, in a second-floor walk-up with a wrought iron gate and no doorman. Her mailbox still had her name. No roommates listed. The building manager was a guy named Carl, who looked like he drank out of a thermos-marked beer before noon. Vance, he said, scratching his chin with a key. Yeah, she's quiet, pays on time, doesn't throw parties. I like her. Anyone come by lately? Strangers, men in suits, pudding enthusiasts. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. No strangers that I saw. She's got a friend who visits sometimes. A tall woman, sharp dresser, talks like she knows 5 more seeker. Then you do, but that's about it. No pudding. Mind if I take a look inside? He hesitated, then shrugged. She's current on rent. Just don't break anything. The apartment was tidy, neutral, and unlived in that way that suggests the occupant either travels a lot or is trying very hard to be invisible. There were no personal photos, no books with notes in the margins. The fridge was clean enough to double as an operating theater, and the only thing on the nightstand was a small stack of business cards. None with her name, but one with that same black triangle and circle symbol embossed into the surface-pocketed one. In the bottom drawer of her desk, I found a notebook. Most of the pages were blank, but the back had a single entry scrolled in pencil. If I forget again, go to Wolfe. He knows, trust no one in pinstripes. I locked up and took a cab back to the brownstone, feeling like the air was getting colder, even though the weather hadn't changed. Fritz let me in with a look that asked 20 questions, none of which he said out loud. Wolfe was back at his desk. Miss Vance was still seated in the armchair, but she looked more alert, like she'd been listening to something internal, and finally caught the tail of a memory. Well, Wolfe said, she's been acting strange at work, a week or more off disorientation, and there's a man in a pinstripe suit who asked for her 2 days ago. No name, just menace. She wouldn't see him. Wolfe grunted. There's more. This photo. I handed it over. She brought it in weeks ago, found it in an envelope. No return address. She kept the envelope. I haven't found it yet, but the photo's spooking people. One of the guys in it wore a pinstripe. Same suit as our mystery man? Maybe. Miss Vance leaned forward to look. Her fingers trembled. I do remember this. I remember the woman next to me. She wore a blue scarf. We were somewhere cold. I don't know her name, but I remember that scarf. Henny memory is a seed, Wolfe murmured. I pulled the card with the black symbol and laid it on the desk. Found a few of these in her apartment. Same symbol as the one embedded in Thepiding. Wolfe's nostrils flared. That was never good, sir. I added. One more thing hellocked. Up, eyebrows raised. Your turmeric, it's gone. Wolfe didn't move, but I saw the storm gather behind his eyes. Someone had been in the kitchen. In Fritz's kitchen, in his kitchen. The brownstone had been breached, and Nero Wolfe was now officially on the hunt. Wolfe didn't stand it and raise his voice, didn't so much as twitch his pinky finger, but when he finally spoke, the temperature in the room dropped like someone had cracked open a meat locker. Fritz, the call wasn't loud, but it traveled with weight. A moment later, Fritz appeared in the doorway, looking more ruffled than I'd seen him since the great brandy spill of 2017. Yes, Mr. Wolfe, you are certain Fritz not a dunce. It was precisely half a jar yesterday. I made the braised lamb rub myself this morning. It was empty. Wolfe turned to me. Did you see signs of entry? Shook my head. Her apartment was locked clean. No mess, no force, no one watching it, no signs of break-in. But this, I held up the notebook, and the business card was hidden. Not decorative hidden. Miss Vance sat upright, her eyes flicking from Wolfe to me to the jar in Fritz's hand. You think someone broke into my apartment to erase my memory, and into your kitchen to steal turmeric? Wolfe gave her the look he usually reserved for people who asked. If he did divorce work? No. I think someone breached this house deliberately. Turmeric is not valuable. It is, however, distinct. Its absence is thickened of detail. I do not miss, which means its theft was not opportunistic. It was a message to you. Yes, and I have received it. Elenina's hands were clenched in her lap. I still don't understand why I'm involved. Nor do I, Wolfe said. But I intend to. He gestured toward the pudding. That Miss Vance was not dessert. It was bait, a controlled delivery of both symbol. And sent a clue designed to confuse, not inform. And what's the move, I asked? I will consider, you will act. Return to the gallery tomorrow morning. I want the provenance of the photograph established. I want names for each face. Begin with the man in the pinstripe suit, assuming is not the one who dropped by today to spoon out our spice rack. Precisely epicated the card again and started for the door. And Archie Wolfe said, stopping me, you will also call Saul. This now requires delicacy. When Wolfe says delicacy, he means a scalpel over a mallet. He meant Saul Panzer. The following morning I caught Saul before got too deep into a tail job and filled him in. The man didn't flinch at the mention of erased memories, foodborne clues, or turmeric. Theft. That's why Wolfe trusted him. He didn't rattle and hadn't improvise. He investigated with the patience of a glacier and the precision of a diamond cutter symbol card embedded in pudding. Saul asked over coffee. Yep, and Wolfe thinks it was Miantis. A signal not to Eleanor through her. And now somebody's rearranged our spice drawer. I'll see what I can find on the symbol. Might be cult stuff, or just a brand logo from hell. He disappeared into his coat like a shadow and vanished toward midday. My job was the gallery. He headed back there in this time. Glenn Riker didn't argue. He handed me the shipment manifest from 3 weeks prior and pointed to an unlabeled crate that had come in via courier service. No return address, no origin note. The gallery had logged it under miscellaneous donations, figuring it was part of a batch purchase from an estate that had gone through auction. The label on the outer wrapping was still in their system, Donna Weldings. That rang a bell. I dug a little further and turned up a name attached to it, W. Allen Donahue, an old-school art investor with a private collection in Vermont. The guy had passed away 2 months ago. I made a mental note to ask Lon Cohen to check the obits and maybe stir up an archivist or two. There was still no clue who sent the photo, but the envelope that came with it had been saved in the gallery's back records. Had insisted on it. I found it filed under personal EV, tucked into a drawer, plain white. No markings except for a quote, single stamp, and an address typewritten. In all caps, Elanina Van Co. Glen Riker. Loomis and Bear Gallery, Chelsea, NYC. No postmark. No return. Just symbol triangle circle line drawn neatly on the back flap in black ink. Fecund of thing meant to be noticed without explanation. I brought it back to the brownstone. Wolfe didn't touch it, of course, but he studied it, like it might confess under pressure. Eileen was seated again, looking pale, but steadier. Fritz hovered in the hallway, not liking any of it. You recognize the name Donahue? I asked Wolfe, superficially a patron of several mid-century painters devoted to abstraction, little known beyond privater circles. Died recently. Yep, estate's being cleaned out. One of his great unlabeled shows. Up at Elanina's gallery. That's where the photo came from. Wolfe nodded. Someone used the estate as a vehicle. Clever. Confusing a true shipment with own contrived. It gets better. The envelope, she got no postmark. It wash and delivered. The symbol was drawn. No signature. Wolfe turned his attention to Helena. Miss Vance, if I may ask bluntly, have you undergone any recent medical procedures? She blinked. No, nothing beyond a checkup last fall. Have you consumed any unusual food besides the pudding? No, I hardly cook. I eat at work, or I ordering. You live alone? Yes. No friends with keys, lovers, siblings, no family that I'm close to, no boyfriend, no one I trust enough to leave a key, with which Macus tampering of your home even more precise. No sign of intrusion, no disturbance. And yet this, he gestured to the symbol, was placed with purpose. Ellen stood, her expression riddle. Are you saying I've been drugged, hypnotized? What I am not speculating, I am deducing. And what I deduce is this: you were used. Used how? Your name, your address, your gallery, your person. All of it was selected, not by random chance, but because you were a sufficiently obscure, yet reliable conduit. Someone needed a delivery. Medetomy. Quietly, indirectly, and plausibly, you provided the route. She looked at the pudding, then at Wolfe. Then what am I? You are the question, but also potential of answer. That didn't exactly put her at ease. But she sat again, as if bracing for what was coming. Text, sir. I said. What now? We must tighten the net. Call Mr. Parker. I wish the Donahue estate shipping records, who handled their art well, received it, and who might have had access to insert this photo. You think it was an inside job? I think it was a misdirection. The photo is the lure, but memory loss, that is the crime. He turned to Fritz. You will please inventory the entire kitchen. If anything else has been touched, I want to know. Fritz gave a curt nod and vanished. Wolfe closed his eyes for a long moment. Archie. Yes, we are being maneuvered, and I do not care for it. I didn't either, because someone out there had gotten into Wolfe's house, into Eleanor's mind, into both our routines, and worse, they'd done it with elegance. We weren't hunting a brute, we were chasing a brain. If you'd told me a week ago that a bowl of pudding and a missing half jar of turmeric would be enough to get Wolfe interested in something that didn't involve food or orchids, I have laughed you off the stoop. But there I was the next morning, drinking lukewarm coffee and waiting outside the back gate of an auction house in Tribeca with Fred Durkin beside and tapping his fingers on his steering wheel. Fred had the kind of build that made people on sidewalks move aside even when he wasn't trying, and the kind of face that made people forget what they were doing when he looked directly at them. Wolfe didn't always send Fred right away. Saul was his scalpel, Fred his crowbar, but this was a job for both finesse and muscle. We needed someone inside the Donahue estate, and Fred, under the guise of a low-rent art handler with a good back and no questions, had gotten himself hired. Fourth morning loadout. You sure they're going to have answers? He asked me without looking up from the dashboard. They'll have something. Shipping manifests, last-minute item swaps, weird delivery routes. Wolfe wants anything that smells like a private favor or an unexplained entry. Fred's whole case smells weird. I left him to it and made a second stop to check in with Lon Cohen at the Gazette. Lon, as usual, met me with half a bagel in his mouth and a deadline breathing down his neck. "You're lucky I owe Wolfe a favor," he said, brushing crumbs off his tie. "What do you want, a clean obituary? Give me a look. U for Donis Hugh W. Allen. Wealthy collector, died 2 months ago. Anything not in the papers?" He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Official cause, washered failure. Quiet funeral, private trust. Left most of his collection to a series of smaller museums, but the rest private sale. Handled off the record by a group called Torrance Heritage Logistics. That's boutique stuff. High-dollar cloaks and daggers," I whistled. "Lo, you got contact info already, sent it to your phone? But Archie, be careful. The Donahue crowd quiet, but not small time. You stir their soup too hard, and you won't be invited to the next auction." Wouldn't want to ruin my social calendar. I headed back to the brownstone, where the real excitement had apparently unfolded without me. Fritz intercepted me at the door with an expression like someone had insulted his soul. "Something's missing again," he said without preamble. "What now?" "Clove oil," I checked. "Every jar. The seal has been broken." I walked straight to Wolfe's office. He was at his desk reading with his fingers laced across his stomach, eyes half-lidded. Ella Lanevin sat opposite him, knees together, spine straight like a student awaiting final judgment. She changed clothes, gray-slack soft blue sweater, and looked like she'd finally gotten a full night's sleep. But the haunted look behind her eyes said the amnesia hadn't budged. "Fred's inside the auction house." I told Wolfe. "Well, know soon if there was tampering in the Donahue shipments." And Lon confirmed Donahue's leftovers were filtered through a group called Torrance Heritage Logistics, private sales, no paperwork trail. "Expected," Wolfe said. "There's more. Fritz just found the seal broken on the clove oil." That got Wolfe's attention. He opened his eyes fully and sat up straighter. "Which drawer?" "Middle row, left cabinet." He did a full inventory. "Then our interloper has returned and riskied her entry despite the risk of surveillance." Elenina blinked. "Someone's been here again." "Indeed, and not to search or sabotage, but to send a message. Clove oil is used in culinary work." "Yes, but also in preservation, embalming, and sometimes in theatrical disguise. Absence indicates not appetite, but intention." "And turmeric?" she asked. "A scent marker," Wolfe replied. "Turmeric, when heated, releases curcumin. A bright, bitter aroma. Clove oil masks it. The two together suggest a kind of pairing, possibly an olfactory code. It is designed to trigger memory or suppress it." Eleanor swallowed. "You think they drugged me with spices?" "Not in the common sense, but scent is powerfully linked to memory. Whoever orchestrated this has more than culinary knowledge. They understand it." "Mind," I interrupted. "That symbol, the triangle with the line and circle, Saul found something, old European cipher mark, shows up in pre-war psychiatric journals used by a Frindi collective out of Austria. They believed memory could be reprogrammed through repeated scent exposure combined with suggestion." Wolfe nodded once, and the pudding saw says the recipe matches one used in those experiments. Citrus custard, almond extract, and a syrup base containing trace amounts of clove and turmeric. "He's waiting on a chemist to confirm." Elelania stood up, visibly shaken. "So someone experimented on me like a lab rat." Wolfe's gaze was cold, but not unkind. "No, someone selected you as a vessel. The memory loss is not a side effect. It is the point." Fritz came, and then, silent and grim, holding a thin sheet of paper, he handed directly to Wolfe. Unfolded Iden, read, his lips tightening. He held it up for me. It was the shipping invoice from the Donahue estate, last crate out, marked for donation to the Loomis. And bed gallery had been logged by hand, not typed like the others. The Initials buys it EV someone forged her hand. I said, or she did it and forgot. Or Wolfe said softly. She did it under influence suggestion. The crate was meant to be received by her. Registered under her name and delivered into this house through her hand. That's a long con, I said, not a con, a ritual. Wolfe pressed his fingertips together. Miss Vance, may I ask you something direct? Yes. When you looked at that photograph, did anything besides the scarf strike you a sensation, a smell? She hesitated. There was a sound not real in my head, like glass breaking. Far away, Wolfe closed his eyes. Archie, find the woman in the blue scarf. That photograph is the key. I believe we are looking not only for a person, but a connection, a tether. Someone in that photo is the origin point. And the man in the pinstripe, he is the conductor. But the electricity comes from someone else. I stood. Where do I start? Begin with Torrance. Push past the paperwork, find out who packaged the Donahue crate and who handled the envelope that came with it. Then find the scarf. Elenina looked up. And me, you remain here, Wolfe said. For your safety, and because I intend to reverse what was done to you. She didn't argue. Her eyes glistened, but her posture stayed strong. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed again. The past, he murmured, has been stolen in. I intend to steal it back. And just like that, the man who had it movement had launched a war with clove oil, a bowl of pudding, and a forgotten photograph as his weapons. There are worse places to start a scent trail than a boutique art logistics firm with too many locks on their doors and too few names on their website. Torrance Heritage Logistics operated out of a discreet brick office in a converted warehouse on the East River, where the buildings were as anonymous as the vans parked outside. I had called ahead, well implied a meeting, and when I showed up in a blazer and my best face of mild indignation, the receptionist handed me off to a manager named Hugh Last. He was tall, bold, wore rimmed glasses without irony, and looked like he judged people by the straightness of their paper clips. His office was windowless, stacked with sealed files and sleek catalog binders that I wasn't invited to touch her. I'm afraid we don't disclose client lists, Mr. Goodwin, he said, fingers steepled, voice polite, but coated in shellac. Good, because I'm not asking for your clients. Just one of your shipments from the Donahue estate, a crate unmarked Cento, the Loomis and Bear Gallery 3 weeks ago, came through your system. Ring a bell, he blinked slowly. We handled a great many items from Mr. Donahue's estate. If it was unmarked, as you say, then it wasn't logged formally, which means I wouldn't know anything about it. But you would know who handled it. Your people pack everything in-house, true, but even if a crate was unlocked, it would have passed through our verification process then. Give me names. He hesitated, as though caught between protocol and pragmatism. I leaned forward. This is about stolen art. It's about a woman who's had her brain scrambled, summonized your operation as a funnel. That should bother you. He reached for a drawer, pulled a small clipboard, and studied the contents. We had one irregular item noted during the Dona Wesserning, an unlabeled crate, no manifest. One of our tong logged it as miscellaneous ephemera. It was hand-delivered to the gallery, not sent through normal shipping. Who signed off tapped the sheet, internal code only DP47, which means David Plum Jr. Inventory Tech. Still with us. Where is he now? In the back room. Want me to get him? No, I'll go to him. I followed Landmaster through a secure hallway into the storage section. David Plum was 22, lanky, with a nervous disposition, and the kind of hair that made you want to ask if he'd lost a bet. He blinked when introduced and looked at me like I might be a health inspector. You handled the Donahue crate? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, came in last minute. I didn't open it. Just repacked it, sealed it, and put it out for courier. Courier, he scratched his temple. That's the weird part. Most stuff went out through our fleet, but this crate, I was told to hand it to a guy directly said he was from internal routing, but hadn't have a uniform. Describe him a medium build brown. Coat wore gloves, didn't speak much, just showed a slit with the delivery address, Loomis and bearded, and a symbol. My pulse kicked up. Symbol? Yeah. Triangle circle line drawn right on. The slip, I thought it was a client mark. I thanked him, got a copy of the handling note, and left with my gut twisting like a corkscrew. The delivery had been by hand, quiet, precise. Wolfe had been right. It was a ritual, not a mistake, and it had moved through. Every checkpoint like it belonged. I called Wolfe from a pay phone down the block, because by now paranoia was free with the soup. It was hand-delivered. I said, guy, showed a mark. Symbol was right there on the slip. Your favorite trio, triangle circle. Line a signature. Wolfe said, not hiding, declaring, like an artist. No, Archie, like a priest. I didn't like that answer, but it fit. Whoever we were gazing had built their trail deliberately and placed a la Lenina in the center like a ceremonial vase painted. Hollow and breakable. It wasn't just memory theft. It was choreographed. Back at the brownstone, I found Fritz and Ella Lenina in the dining room. She was peeling an orange with the care of a surgeon. Fritz watched like he was guarding state secrets. In citrus form? Any flashes? I asked her, sitting down. Some, she said softly. Smells, patterns, not memories. More like echoes. I was in a room once with tall windows and wooden floors and a woman speaking German. Fritz and I exchanged glances. I turned to him. Wolfe. In the plant rooms I found Wolfe surrounded by orchids in full bloom. His hair set slightly askew, as if he'd shifted at some point and forgotten to correct it. That from him was the equivalent of pacing. Sir, I said, we've got a name. David Plum packed the crate, but the delivery wasn't internal. It was handed off by someone using the symbol as a credential. He didn't open his eyes, so the envelopeth crate, the pudding, all three borne by hand. We are no longer looking for accomplices. We are looking for acolytes. Saul called while I was out. I added, have found the woman in the blue scarf. Wolfe opened his eyes. Her name's Dr. Greta Holtz, German. Psychologist, works with memory trauma, formerly attached to Abrevate. European clinic, vanished 2 years ago, reappeared quietly in New York under a new visa sponsored by a cultural restoration fund. Wolfe leaned back and finally exhaled. Bring her. She might not come willingly. Then bring her. Photographer voice, her presence in any form. Miss Vance's memory is tethered to her. We must reintroduce the connection. I nodded and headed back out, dialing Saul on the way. We met in a quiet cafe on 67th. He handed me a folder and an audio recorder. She does therapy sessions. Got a copy of One Voices. Sharp clipped lots off scent-based association drills. Pioneered something called aroma triggers, lichacent-based hypnosis, more or less. No proof she's involved, but the methods match. She used turmeric and clove oil in concentration exercises. Smell to memory to identity, and the symbol. Saul flipped the folder. Found this, her old clinic's internal sigil, used to mark patients under experimental protocols. There, it was clear as ink, the triangle, the circle, the line back at Thabron Stone. I played the audio file in Wolfe's office. Ella Lenina sat listening with her eyes closed, breathing slow. Wolfe said nothing. The voice on the tape, Holtz's, was precise and deliberate, moving through a series of soft instructions. When it reached the word Erinnerung, German for memory, Ella Lena gasped. I know that word, she whispered. She said it to me before I forgot. I think I was trying to leave, and she said, without memory, there is no self. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, prepare the office for what? For the gathering. I stared at him. Already. Yes, bring them all. Riker Plum, the manager, Laster, and find Halt. Tell them we have answers and questions, and that I intend to reclaim what was taken. You think they'll come? Wolfe gave him a look like I'd asked if eggs needed shells. They will come, because none of them understand what they've been part of, and that is my advantage. And just like that, the trap was set, the players were coming to the stage. Wolfe would sit, they would squirm, and the truth, strange, bitter, and full of scent, would finally begin to rise. I've seen Wolfe arrange more than a few gatherings in that office of his. Usually they involve a murder, a red-faced client, 3 or 4 jittery suspects, and enough tension to curdle milk. This one had all of fate except a corpse, unless you counted the dead space in Ella Lanina. Vance's head where her memories used to live, by mid-afternoon the next day. The stage was set. Wolfe's office had its usual battle order. Leather chairs pulled forward, side tables, cleared, windows closed, and the thermostat exactly 2 cooler than normal to discourage excessive sweating, unless it was due to guilt. Wolfe sat, of course, in the throne-like chair behind his desk, perfectly still, except for the motion of his fingertips, drumming once against each other every 12 seconds. That was his. Tell if you knew how to read him. He was either calculating or holding back fire, maybe both. Ella Lanina sat to the side pale but collected, her hands folded in her lap. She'd insisted on staying. Wolfe hadn't objected, but he'd watched her carefully all morning, as though a shift in her pupils might give him something to hang a deduction on. I was stationed by the globe, ready to rotate it dramatically if the occasion called for it, which I admit it never actually does. Precisely 3 o'clock, the suspects arrived. First came Glenn Riker, the gallery manager, nervous as a cat near a vacuum cleaner. He took one look at Wolfe, gulped, and sank into the nearest chair without waiting to be invited. Then Hugh Lim, masteraster from Torrance Logistics, sharp-suited and visibly annoyed to be summoned anywhere, especially by someone whose profession didn't begin with judger-collector David Plum, followed young, anxious with the energy of a kid. One knows he's about to be yelled at, but still doesn't understand why. And finally, Dr. Greta halts. She arrived alone, with the self-possession of someone whose face had scrutiny before, and come out the other side, smiling, mid-40s, hair pulled back into a severe bun, a navy trench that looked tailored by a philosophy department, and a gaze that flickered around the room like a scalpel searching for soft tissue. She looked at Eleanor for just a second longer than polite, then turned to Wolfe. "I was told you have questions," she said in an accent that had been sanded down by time, but not erased. "I have answers," Wolfe said. "But yes, first questions." He gestured for her to sit. She did, smoothly crossing her legs at the ankle and resting her gloved hands on her knee. "Miss Vance," Wolfe began, "has been the subject of what I will call psychological maneuver, something executed with surgical care, and, if I may say so, theatrical flair, fallacy of memory, the delivery of a symbolic item, the triggering of her presence here, all carefully plotted." "I have no idea what you mean," Holt said. "Evenly, I think you do," Wolfe said. "But we'll get to that, Mr. Riker. Your gallery received a crate from the Donahue estate, logged with Ella Lanina Vance's initials. It contained nothing but a photograph. Do you recall?" Riker cleared his throat. "Yes," I told Mr. Goodwin. She seemed disturbed by it. Indeed, that photograph, Miss Vance later discovered, was not one of Donahue's official records. It was inserted by whom I now know. Mr. Lamester. "Yes," Lamster said shortly. "It was part of the final loadout handled by your employee." Mr. Plum started to speak, then thought better of it and nodded. "Instead, you packed the crate." "Yes." Wolfe asked him. "I didn't pack it," Plum said. "It was already sealed. I just labeled it like I was told by a man in a brown coat. He showed me a symbol. I thought he was with us." Internal rooting Wolfe glanced at Holtz. She didn't blink. Miss Vance received the photograph, Wolfe continued, and shortly after began experiencing disorientation, memory gaps, and eventually full-scale retrograde. "Amnesia. Coincidence?" Holt said flatly. "No." Wolfe said, "A plan." He looked to me, Archie. I stepped forward and placid items on Wolfe's desk. The bowl that had held the pudding carefully cleaned, but still bearing the faint aroma of citrus and almond, and the symbol. Card Eleanor had found in her apartment. Wolfe gestured at them. These were delivered to this house through Miss Vance. She washes not by chance, but by profile, stable, unobtrusive, connected to a legitimate gallery, and crucially susceptible to the kind of conditioning that had to be tested before it was deployed. Holtz didn't respond. You pioneered the use of scent-based memory triggers, Wolfe said. In a facility outside Vienna, you developed a system of identity erosion and reconstruction. Discredited, perhaps forgotten. No, that's not illegal. Hall said calmly. Research is not a crime. No, Wolfe agreed, but applying it without consent. Riker looked like he'd swallowed his tongue. Lamester looked like he was beginning to believe he should have stayed home. I submit. Wolfe said that Miss Vance was subjected to a controlled psychologic experiment without her knowledge, the pudding laced with memory. Triggering compounds turmeric and clove oil was the reset, the symbol, a mental anchor, the photograph. The primer together, they erased one narrative and planted another. And to what end? Holtz asked, voice still steady. Why would I do such a thing for? You didn't, Wolfe said, not alone. He turned to Laster Torrance Logistics, received a private directive, 1 crate, no inventory. You accepted it. Master hesitated. I assumed it was part of the donation. You assume nothing, Wolfe said. You abide. Because your firm, like Holtz's work, is funded in part by a shadow foundation interested in experimental memory applications. I raised an eyebrow. That part was news to me. I discovered it. Wolfe continued when Saul Panzer traced the funding for Holtz's reappearance. In New York, the same entity holds shares in a cultural trust that subsidizes your firm's shipping insurance. Master, your protestations of ignorance are either lies or symptoms of the same. Manipulation inflicted on Miss Vance. The room went quiet. Riker cleared his throat. I don't understand, no. Wolfe said. You don't. That is precisely the problem. He turned his gaze back to Holtz. You are not the architect of this scheme. You are the instrument. But someone used you to test a theory. Can a person be erased and reinserted into an environment with new purpose, no memoriantures, and no history? Miss Vance was their pilot subject. I suspect you never expected her to land here. Holtz was silent. Then finally she smiled. You are formidable. Do not patronize me. Wolfe said. I was approached with a proposal. She said anonymous payment in cash, a subject pre-selected fee. Wanted to see how far the induction could go. I agreed. Out of scientific curiosity and necessity. Who approached you? I never saw officially instructions. Packages were rooted substances prepared. The target had to deliver one object and consume another. That was all. And the symbol? I asked an anchor. Holtz said to see if the mind would retain it post-induction. Apparently, it did. Nina, to her credit, didn't cry, but she stood slowly and looked Holtz dead in the eye. You stole me, she said quietly. Holtz didn't reply. Wolfe leaned back. Mr. Riker, you are complicit only in negligence. Mr. Plum in ignorance. Mr. Lamester, well, your compliance was bought. Miss Holtz, you will remain here until Inspector Cramareris. I believe he'll be very interested in what you've just admitted. Holtz looked amused but not surprised. As they filed out, I stayed back watching Wolfe watch Nina. She hadn't sat back down. She stood still and composed, as if steadying herself on newly discovered legs. You said, she said to Wolfe, that I was the question, and the answer. Wolfe nodded. Once you are, because still exist, which means their experiment failed. And that, Miss Vance, is the only victory that matters. She smiled, then faint but real. And first time in days. So did I, the ice brownstone? had weathered many storms, murderers, blackmailers, counterfeits, and once infamously onopyrocritic with an insulted palate. But this one was different. Wolfe didn't say so, not directly, but I could read it in the stiffness of his posture, the silence he had followed Holtz's removal, and the way his eyes lingered on Ellen Van Siefter. The others had gone. We'd handed Holtz off to Kramer with a neat little bow of evidence and a full transcription of her admission. Kramer, of course, had barked like a dog chasing a foray truck, insisting he wasn't interested in putting psychological-coded symbols, but still taking Holtz into custody, like she might sprout a warrant from her coat pocket. He would grumble, investigate, and lightly stumble into a national security curtain he wouldn't be allowed to peek behind. That wasn't our problem. Our problem remained Miss Vance, and the fact that whoever had orchestrated her manipulation still hadn't shown their face. "She's recovering," Wolfe muttered later, more to himself than to me. But incomplete. We were in the office. Ella had been settled in the upstairs guest room for the night, at Wolfe's insistence. She hadn't objected. She seemed too Toretto object to anything. I'd never seen a person so composed. While carrying a mind patched together with missing glue, she remembers fragments. I said that scarf the German a room with windows, but nothing that points to who's behind it. "They're exactly," Wolfe said. "Miss Holtz was the hand, but mine that remains hidden, and you think they'll come looking for her?" He turned his head slowly, his gaze narrowing. "No, they'll come to see if the experiment failed." I stared at him. "You think someone else will try to make contact?" "I do, and I intend to catch them in the act," which is how 24 hours later, I found myself parked in the kitchen at midnight, coffee in hand, lights dimmed, watching a small slip of paper on the dining room table, like it might explode. Slip was bait, Wolfe's idea. It looked innocuous enough. Just a full deadnet scrolled with Ella Lenina's name and an invitation to meet someone at a familiar address, the Lumizan Gallery. Handwriting wasn't hers, but it was a careful imitation, using ink we'd scented faintly with turmeric and clove oil. Just enough to trip the senses. The idea was simple. If the handlers were still watching Ella Lenine, they'd see Harriet. The note she hadn't eyed using gloves, and they'd come to intercept. I didn't expect it to work at 2:14 a.m. It did. The faintest sound of footstep nerfed back. Stooped Fritz, who had been pretending to make tea in the next room, froze mid-pour. I rose slowly and slipped to the hall. Wolfe, already stationed in his chair in the darkened office, didn't move a muscle. He just nodded once I waited, until the figure was 3 steps into the kitchen before flipping the light. He froze, late 30s, sharp features, black jacket, nondescript shoes, the kind of man you forget 3 minutes after seeing gunless. You're trained not to. "Good evening," I said, stepping between him and the door. "Coffee?" His eyes flicked around, calculating, not scared, just unsure how deep the water was. "Who are you?" he asked. "Goodwin, Wolfe's man." "And you?" "I'm no one funny. You look like someone who likes memory manipulation and midnight strolls." He said nothing. Behind me, Wolfe's voice floated down the hall. "Bring him in, Archie." I nodded toward the hallway. "Let's not make this messy." He followed without fuss, probably realized that any trouble hatred to start would end with him staring at the ceiling while Fritz sharpened the carving knives. Once seated in the office with Wolfe, backlit by the desk lamp, and me at my usual post, we got to work. Wolfe didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You were watching Miss Vance," he said. The man said nothing. "You were sent to verify the status of the subject. Her presence here confirms a deviation in your projected trajectory. Holtz is no longer useful, and the experiment's failure endangers the program." Still silence. Wolfe gestured at my opened the small black folder I'd prepared that morning and laid out 3 photographs. One of Eleanor at Thieglary, one of the crate from Torrance, and one of the symbol card You trafficked in identity, Wolfe said. But your mistake was assuming no one would notice what had gone missing. Finally, the man spoke. His voice was smooth and almost clinical. You can't stop it. Stop what? I asked the program. He said, you think this is about one woman, a single pudding weave. Already moved on. So you admit this was deliberate? He shrugged. She was a controlled test. If it hadn't been her, it would have been someone else. Wolfe frowned. And what was the purpose of delivering her to me? The man smiled faintly. To see if you'd noticed that I admit rattled me. You mean she was bait? No, she was the gauge. We needed a fixed point. You were that point. I looked at Wolfe. He was staring at the man with the same expression he used when a plant refused to bloom. They're testing you now, I said. Wolfe's voice was cold. Apparently you're saying this whole setup, putting photograph symbol, was a test to see how Wolfe would respond. Yes. And what's the verdict? Demanded an answer. Wolfe stood up slowly, which was rare. He walked to the window, stared out into the dark, and then turned back. You will leave this house? He said. And when your superiors ask you, will tell them this. I am not an experiment. I am not a control. I am not a participant. He stepped forward, looming over the man like a thundercloud with eyebrows. I am Tyrannus. No more subjects, no more trials. If you come near this house again, I will see to it that your program dissolves. Like sugar in tea. The man stood, adjusted his jacket, smiled, messageries. I walked him out. He didn't look back. The next morning, Eleanor Vance came downstairs and said she remembered her father's name. She cried in the breakfast nook Fritz made her fresh scone and didn't speak a word. Later, when she'd gone for a walk in the garden, Wolfe said to me, there are still missing pieces. She's recovering. I said, you did it. No, Wolfe said. They failed. I merely held the line. Still, I said, she's back. Wolfe nodded once, for now. He picked up a spoonful of Fritz's custard, sniffed it, and paused. No clove, he murmured. Excellent. And that, believe it or not, was the end of it. No gunshots, no headlines, no bodies. Just a woman reclaiming her memories and a man reminding the world he wasn't a variable in anyone's equation. Which, if you know Nero Wolfe, is exactly how it should be. The brownstone slowly exhaled. That's the best way I can put it, after weeks of tension intrusions and memorigams that would have made Pavlov nervous. We'd earned a stretch of stillness. No new visitors arrived at the door. Nazimbols appeared tucked under sauces. Wolfe resumed his orchid routine. Fritz returned to building soulets instead of psychological profiles. Even Saul Panzawo was never much for reflection. Told me he was glad to be back in a world where pudding is just pudding. Eleanor Vance stayed on by Wolfe's invitation. Not that he phrased it that way. He simply hadn't objected when she continued to occupy the upstairs guest room. That alone told me plenty. Each morning she joined Fritz and me for breakfast, and each morning she remembered a little more. First it was tastes her grandmother's marmalade, the specific bakery that made the rye bread she liked in college. Then came names, flashes of faces from childhood, a book she once loved so much. She read it 5 times before she was 12. Nothing dramatic, no thunderclaps, but every thread she retrieved added another stitch to the tapestry, and nothing. Wolfe, though he didn't say so, was watching her closely. It was the 8th morning when the next twist landed, just when I was starting to believe. We'd earned a denim. I was in the kitchen halfway through a 3rd cup of coffee when Elena walked in holding a single photograph between 2 fingers like it might shatter. I found this in the suitcase, she said. She placed it on the table. It was the same size and stock as the photograph from the crate, but this one was different. It showed 5 people again, but now Elenina stood at the center, no longer a passive background figure. She was younger, maybe 5 years, smiling faintly. Beside her stood Greta Holtz, and behind them waste same building from the earlier photo, stone ivy, covered with tall narrow windows. The back of the photo had a handwritten note in tight European script: reintegration phase 2, EVGH coordinator uncoded. I didn't need Wolfe to explain what this meant, but I went to him anyway. He took the photo without a word, studied it in silence for a long time, and then finally looked up. They documented it. He said they kept records. One was the erasure. Phase 2 was the delivery, which makes her not the only one precisely. And Holtz, unaware, possibly used certainly, but this confirmed she was a participant in more than a clinical capacity. I glanced toward the hall, where Ella Lenina was nauseated in the office, hands folded tightly in her lap. She doesn't remember any of this, I said. She will, Wolfe replied. It is no longer a question of if, but of when. The memory has been physically retained. It is merely obscured by the trauma of manipulation. So what do we? Do we wait? That's not something Wolfe says lightly. Waiting implies a concession to time, to chance. Rather dismantle a clock than wait on one. But in this case, he was right. Elenana was coming back piece by piece, and hurrying the process would risk damaging what was left. Later that afternoon, while Wolfe was deep in the plant rooms, and I was pretending to organize filing cabinets, Ella Lenina came to the doorway. Archie, she said, can I talk to you? I set the files down and waved her in. She sat, glanced at the windows, then looked me straight in the eye. I think I know who the coordinator is. I kept my voice even okay. I don't remember a name yet, but there's a voice. See a man. He used to visit the clinic, if that's what it was. He didn't wear a badge. He never introduced himself, but everyone deferred to him, including Holtzscan you described. Him. She closed her eyes. Cold voice, mid-50s maybe. He used to carry a journal moleskin with the corner folded over. He always smelled like dry leaves and leather. I didn't react, but my skin prickled. You're sure, eyes? And I think he was the one. Who decided it would be me? I heard Holtz argue with him. I don't know what she said, but I know she didn't want to do it. I nodded slowly. That's something. Do you believe me? I do. She exhaled. Then I want to help find him. Now, I'm no stranger to civilians. Offering to jump into a case once the danger's mostly past. It's a nice gesture until someone trips over their courage. But this was different. Ella Lenina wasn't chasing revenge. She wanted to reclaim her agency. I'll talk to Wolfe, I said. She gave a small smile. Oh, you don't have to. He already knows. Of course he did. When I told Wolfe what she remembered, he didn't so much as flinch. He simply requested I retrieve a folder labeled M59 from the locked cabinet north windows. I hadn't touched that drawer in months. When I pulled it open, it was like something exhaling. Inside the folder, 3 surveillance photos, all grainy but sharp enough to make out the key details. Same man in each gray Kofi collar moleskin journal, tall, unsmiling. With him in one of the photos was Greta Holtz. They were standing on the steps of a museum in Frankfurt. Panzer sent these 2 nights ago. Wolfe said you didn't mention it. I needed confirmation. Miss Vance has now supplied it, so who is he? Name unknown, code namest in a European dossier. Dear Archivar, the archivist. Fitting, isn't it? Collects Mariette's identity. I whistled. And you think he's still in New York? I do. His work is incomplete. Miss Vance escaped the pattern that makes her dangerous. Dow. Alert Kramer, no Kramer, but we'll find only doors closed to him. I will speak to someone else. That someone else turned out to be a quiet contact of Wolfe's in the diplomatic course. I didn't ask how Wolfe knew him or why he owed Wolfe a favor. When Wolfe calls in a chip, you didn't question the poker game. 2 days later, a letter arrived on cream. Stationery delivered by hand, no signature, no heading. but inside was an address: Apton 3B47 Roanoke Street, 2s 8 2. He returns to write. It wasn't poetic, but it was enough. Wolfe handed meth note with instructions so specific, I nearly wrote them down. I was to observe photograph document. No confrontation, no contact. So at 7:30 p. On Tuesday night, I was in a parked car 2 blocks from Roanoke Street, with a thermos of coffee and a camera in my lap. The building was quite clean, no doorman, but a security panel on the front. At 8:07 a figure appeared, tall trenchcoat, journal tucked beneath his arm. He entered with a key. At 8:46, the lights in the 3rd floor window flickered on. He was real. At 9:32, I returned to the brownstone with photographs. Wolfe studied them in silence. "It's him," Eleanor said softly. She stood behind Wolfe, her voice steady. "That's the voice." Wolfe nodded. "And now?" I asked. "Now we let the diplomat deliver a message," Wolfe said quietly, discreetly. I raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to stop him yourself?" "I already have Miss Vance's intact. The experiment failed. If they persist, they will draw attention from others. Attention they do not want." He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. "The pudding," he murmured, "was meant to raise her. Instead, it restored her that Archie's symmetry." I poured 2 fingers of brandy, handed him one, and raised mine to memory. Wolfe didn't open his eyes to defiance. He said, and for once, I couldn't argue. The following morning, I woke up to the smell of Fritz's cinnamon rolls, and a silence in the brownstone that felt earned. It had been 2 weeks since the man with the leather-scented voice slipped through our nets, and Wolfe hadn't said a word about it since. Not a lecture, not a musing, not even a cryptic sigh. That silence told me everything I needed to know. As far as he was concerned, the storm had passed. Not ended necessarily, just passed. Elena Vance, for her part, had reclaimed more than her memories. Each day she was more solid, more anchored, like she was living from the inside out again. She'd started journaling in Wolfe's office in the afternoons, quietly recording the memories that returned in bits and waves. Once or twice I caught her sketching theses from that photograph. Holtz, the archivist, the others. She never asked me if they'd been found. She seemed to know the answer without needing it spoken. That morning, she joined Wolfe and me in the office after breakfast, carrying a thin manila envelope. "I think it's time," she said. Wolfe looked up from the orchid growers. Weakly, his brow lifted an inch. "I want to go back to the gallery," she continued. "Glenn called. They have filled my position. But he asked if I'd consult on a new installation. I think I'm ready." Wolfe didn't speak for a moment. He considered her the way he might consider a soul that hadn't fallen. "Are you certain?" "I am. It won't be the same, but I'm not the same either." I glanced at Wolfe, expecting him to argue, but instead he nodded, slow, approving. "Very well, Hesed, but you will continue the journal." "I will. And if you are contacted again by a known, I'll come straight here." That sealed it. We walked her to the door, and for the first time since this whole pudding fiasco started, I watched her step onto 35th Street, not as somebody naturing to remember who she was, but as someone choosing who to be. We stood in the doorway for a minute longer than necessary. Wolfe eventually grunted and turned back inside. I followed. "You think she'd be safe?" I asked. "She is no longer valuable to them," Wolfe said. "That seems optimistic." "No, strategic. They test the boundaries of silence. They do not seek exposure. The fact that she is whole and watched is enough deterrent." I didn't argue. Wolfe had a way of saying the final word without raising his voice, but just to be sure. I phoned Saul later that day and asked him to keep a quiet eye on the gallery for the rest of the week. Saul didn't ask why. He never does. Around 5 that evening, I returned from a walk to find Wolfe in the kitchen. Not sitting, not lecturing, but standing beside Fritz, watching him lay a pat brine to a tart pan with a level of scrutiny usually reserved for criminal testimonier. Hovering, I said, "He has increased the cinnamon." Fritz didn't look up. "On Libby, half a gram. That is not only that is an alteration. It is improvement." Wolfe huffed and stalked out. I joined him in the office a minute later, hiding a grin. "So what now?" I asked. "Back to unpaid trust fund disputes and missing poodles. I find I do not mind." I leaned against the window. "So you think we'll hear from them again, perhaps?" "Want to bet?" Wolfe arched an eyebrow. "On what odds that they'll try again somewhere else? That," he said, "is inevitable. But not with us." "No," Wolfe said, "not with us." Tapped his forefinger against the arm of his chair in a slow rhythm that I'd come to recognize as his version of reflection. Then he looked at me. "They underestimated the mind." He said they believed memory could be rewritten with ingredients and incantations. They failed to understand that the mind is not merely a record. It is a resistance you getting philosophical on. He ignored that Miss Vance survived, not because they were sloppy. They weren't. She survived because memory is not passive. It fights even in silence. Paused, and she found her way here. I shrugged. Happens all the time. They wander in. You lecture, I charm. Someone ends up in cuffs. This was different, I noticed. She did not come seeking justice, no. I agreed. She came because she didn't know where else to go. Wolfe grunted. That is the most legitimate reason of all. The clock ticked outside, the light faded into the first shadows of evening. I poured myself a brandy, poured one for him, and took the armchair across from his desk. "You want to hear something strange?" I said. "I always do." I miss theputting. He opened one eye. Not the symbolism, not the drama, just the idea that a dessert could be a key to something bigger. It's poetic. Sentiment does not suit you, Archie Goodwin, but for a week there, we weren't just solving a mystery. We were fighting back against people who thought they could erase someone's soul with a kitchen recipe. Wolfe didn't answer. He just raised his brandy in a silent toast. I returned it that night as Fritz surveyed a quiet dinner of duck l'orange and potato soup. We ate without interruptions with it. Secrets hidden in condiments, and without strange women at the door, claiming forgotten identities. It felt finally like the end of a chapter. But after dinner, when Wolfe had returned to the orchids, and I was settling in with a book, the doorbell rang. I frowned, checked the clock. 9:07, and answered. No one was there. Just a small white envelope, sealed with a black triangle and circle. No note, no name. Just the symbol. I brought it to Wolfe. He opened it without hesitation. Inside was a single sentence typed on a clean white card. "Some memories cannot be undone. We will not forget that you interfered." Wolfe didn't blink. He folded the card neatly, listed in his drawer, and resumed reading the Orchid Growers Weekly. "Do we do anything?" I asked. "We dine," he said with sleep. "That's it. That is everything. And that in the end is Nero Wolfe's justice, not a Kirkrow, not a confession under pressure, just resistance, defiance, and in her, I never saw Eleanor again. She sent a thank you note, signed it with gratitude and clarity, and moved on to another gallery, another city. But sometimes, when I see an empty bowl at the end of a meal, I remember that pudding, the one with no past that turned out, behold, a future. And I think some cases never really close. They just fade into the mind, which, as we've learned, is exactly where they wanted to be. It was a gray Wednesday. When Wolfe pronounced the matter closed, he didn't know it ceremonially. There was no gavel, no final speech, but it was final, all the same. He simply told Fritz to discard their remaining files from the Vance investigation into the archives. Returned the Orchid Growers Weekly to its place beside his chair, and informed me that if another client arrived with pudding or poetry, You are to reject them at the vestibule. I took that as a compliment. In Wolfe's world, closure was a rare indulgence. Most clients left, either dead, arrested, or disgruntled. Elena Van said that none of the above. She'd left whole, and that to Wolfe was a rarity worth savoring still. There were things left unsaid, fragments unfiled. I had neon questions. Wolfe, I said late that afternoon, as we sat in the office and the light slanted across the rug in amber bands. Do you really think they're finished? He didn't look up. They are concluded for now, but that envelope we will not forget. That doesn't sound like a bow on a package. That sounds like a promise or a bluff, which is the same thing practically speaking. They could try again somewhere else with someone else. He set his book down, finger steepling beneath his chin. Of course they will, but not here. I swirled my coffee. Why are you so sure? Because Archie, despite their pretense of mastery, misunderstood something fundamental. I raised an eyebrow. What's that? They believe the mind to be a container, something you fill, something you empty. But it is not. The mind resists its stores, even what it is told to forget, and it reaches. He gestured toward the orchids. You may teach a vine to bend, but its roots. Remember where they first sought water, Miss Vance was selected because she appeared ideal for detachment. But even she, when severed, sought reconnection, and she found it with us, yes, which madiest the floor in their system. They won't repeat the error. He resumed reading Elit. It sit for a while. At 8 we dined. Breast of squab in Madeira reduction, followed by Fritz's delicate hazelnut. Sewell and 2 glasses of Amonte. Wolfe barely spoke during the meal, which meant he was content. Fritz didn't speak at all, which meant the meal had gone exactly to plan. I handled the conversation, such as it was, by describing a headline I'd read that morning about a man in Jersey who'd stolen his own car to prove a point about insurance fraud. Wolfe grunted once amusement, I think, and asked if the man had succeeded. No, I said, but he got a job offer from Fine Insurance Company afterward. Apparently, they appreciated the initiative. Wolfe shook his head. Idiots. At 10 o'clock. I was back in the office, jacket off, sleeves rolled, finishing the last of the formal write-up. Wolfe insisted we keep on every significant case. This one, titled Simple Advance Account, ran 37 pages. The final page was mostly white space. Wolfe had dictated the closing summary himself. It read, no crime was formally committed, no charges filed, yet injury occurred, and recovery, not retribution, back the objective. Let this stand as an exception. Justice served by restoration, not punishment. It was for Wolfe practical isn't. I closed the file, locked it in the cabinet, and poured myself a modest brandy. I just sat down when the phone rang. Wolfe scowled. Shall I? He waved a hand. I answered, Nero Wolfe's residence. A pause, then a woman's voice. Quiet, controlled. Mr. Goodwin speaking. This is Anala Kerber. I don't believe we've spoken. I straightened. No, we haven't, but I know the name. Wolfe looked up. His ears, if not, his eyes were alert. Kerber was the name we hadn't spoken aloud in front of Ella Lenina, the one Wolfe had suspected without proof of being the silent backer behind Holtz, behind the experimente name, whispered in Panzas. Reports, but never confirmed. I won't ask who you got this number, I said. You shouldn't. I called to deliver a message. Go ahead. There was a rustle as Thost moved closer to the phone. You undid something delicate, something ambitious. That kind of interference is rare. Is this a threat? No. It's an observation. I waited. She was never mean to be broken. Just repositioned. Is that what you call wiping a person's life and feeding them dessert? I call it innovation. You call it violation? You understand the difference. But here's what matters, Mr. Goodwin. The experiment survived. Even if she did, I felt a chill. Wolfe was now watching me carefully, eyes half-lidded. She remembers, I said. Yes, Kerber said, and in time she will remember more. That's why we're leaving her alone. Not out of fear. Out of respect, she rebuilt herself. It makes her unique. The rest will find others. He gripped the phone tighter. You're saying you'll do this again. I'm saying progresto isn't pause for sentiment. Tell Mr. Wolfe he did well better than we expected. But we're not adversaries. We're merely on different timelines. Then she hung up, lowered the receiver slowly. Wolfe was already pouring a brandy. He handed it to me. Well, he said it was her. Kerber nodded. And they're moving on. Of course they are. They're calling it progress, Hesed. It is not progress, it's desecration. I raised my glass. To desecration. He didn't smile, but his voice was calm. To resistance we drank. Then he stood stretched and murmured something I hadn't heard him say in a very long time. I am weary of men who play gods and call it method. The next day we received a small envelope, no return address inside. A single photograph, Eleanor, seated on a bench outside the gallery, head tilted, reading a book. No message, no symbol, just that Wolfe stared at it for a long minute. Then he handed it to me. Violet, he said under what survival. And that is always was that until the next knock on the door. It was 3 weeks later when the final piece arrived, not with a knock or a coded message, but with a soft thud on our stoop at 6:42 a.m. Fritz found it on fuel mat, wrapped in brown paper with no markings except a single stamped word return. Inside the wrapping was a small porcelain bowl, the same one white and chipped, unmistakable. The pudding was gone, of course. In its place was a folded linen napkin, an Athens slip of card. No symbols this time, no threats, just 3 words. We yield farewell. I brought it to Wolfe before breakfast. He took one look at the bowl, sniffed the inside, and set it down like someone returning a relic to its rightful place. That, he said, is their concession. Sounds like surrender. No, they do not surrender. They recede like a rash. Wolfe actually grunted, which for him bordered on high comedy. They believe themselves, Sensen. That is their strength, and their flaw. You think they're really letting it go? They must miss. Vance is no longer an open door. They closed it when she remembered, and they will not knock twice where they've been noticed. Then wire turned the bowl, because they needed to conclude the ritual. Their failure needed punctuation. The bowl is closure. I prefer an indictment. Wolfe steepled his fingers. They prefer symbolism. Let them have it. We have reality. That afternoon, Alalanina returned. She wore her hair differently, shorter now, and there was a silver pin on her lapel in the shape of an open eye. She said it was a gift from a friend at the gallery. I didn't ask more. She was back to herself, but not the self we'd first met. This version was sharper, stronger, and maybe unknowable in new ways, but she still walked into the brownstone like it meant something. She handed Wolfe a small parcel. Thank you, she said. He opened it carefully. Inside was a book on memory and metaphor, first edition. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. Curious selection, he murmured. You might like the chapter on forgetting and purpose. He didn't answer, but I caught the briefest hint of a smile in his eyes. Eleanor turned to me. They won't come again. No, I said, they'll try somewhere else. They already have, she replied. But this time Simeon was watching. I nodded. She stayed for lunch, braised duck, wild rice, orange jasmines, and a black currant tart. Wolfe had absolutely not requested, but didn't complain about. The conversation was light, the way you only manage after weathering something unspeakably heavy. Wolfe didn't interrogate her. I didn't ask what she planned next. Some stories are better left with clean edges. When she left, Wolfe didn't stand, but he did say, "You are always welcome." She stopped at the door, smiled, and replied, "I know." That evening I logged the last note in the case file. The bowl, the card, the final delivery evidence, yes, but also closure. Wolfe instructed me to label the folder not under Halt's or Vance, or memory. Tampering, he wanted it filed under a new category, recovered persons. I asked why, because Justice Wolfe said it's not always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration. They tried town make a person. She remade herself. That is victory enough. Paused, and it was well seasoned, which coming from him was as good as saying worth the trouble. Is that across from him in the office, drink in hand, and watched as he returned to his orchids. He hummed under his breath some strange little tune Fritz swore was from a Tyolian folk song. Outside the city kept spinning Gunnar of what had nearly been lost. Wolfe didn't speak again that night. Hadn't need to. Somewhere in a locked drawer, the pudding bowl remained clean white silent, a symbol of what they'd tried and failed to do. And for once, the only thing I added to the record in my own handwriting was a single line. She remembered, and because of that, so would we forever, Archie Goodwin.